So, WorldCon. It's been a little while since I've been able to make it to WorldCon, and it feels really good to be back. This is an interesting period for me in my career because I have finished the first arc of the Stormlight Archive, and I'm gearing up for the second arc. And I always imagined that being, like, when Book 5 of Stormlight came out, that's the halfway point in the Cosmere, right? That seemed far, far off when I first came up with all of this. I can remember where I first got the idea for the full Mistborn arc. I was at dinner with a bookseller, and I was talking through, like, man, you know, I would love if there were a fantasy series. Why haven't we never seen one where it was epic fantasy, and then you jump forward in time and saw modern day in that fantasy world, and then you could jump forward in time and you could see a science fiction era of the same fantasy world. And we do see a lot of fantasy worlds kind of transition into, like, the industrial era and things like that. But what I'd never really seen was this, and you often also see fantasy, it's like, it's a fantasy world, oh, now it's our world. Terry Brooks did a very good job of that. I'd never seen, like, this idea that you would have an epic fantasy series that became the foundation for religion and mythology, and even kind of like the foundations of government and you know, contemporary thinking in this epic fantasy series that you later got to. So I got really excited at this idea. Because, you know, as a writer, you think of, why hasn't anyone done this? And then a little light goes on in your head. And you're like, I could do that. Why don't I do that? So I started outlining the Mistborn series. Back then, it was going to be 9 books. I'll tell you what happened in a second. So, you're big book people, you know this happens. What's going on with this? Well, it seemed like a good idea to have epic fantasy, contemporary, our world, and then science fiction. Then the wheel of time hit me like a freight train, and it changed the course of my career forever. Suddenly, I had to put down everything I had planned and work for 5 years on this fantastic series that I loved. But it did also disrupt things quite a bit. And so my whole plan for when I would do the next era of Mistborn got pushed back 5 to 7 years. And I found that as I was working on the Wheel of Time, I was missing Mistborn. I was missing Scadrial. And that's when I said, well, I can't really write anything super big between Wheel of Time books, but I need a break. And this is kind of how my career goes, right? I often need something very different from what I've been writing. When I finish something, I need to go to something different. People ask me, how are you so productive, Brandon? It's this idea of always switching to something new keeps it very fresh and original to me. I often say, you wouldn't get Stormlight books any faster if I didn't write things in between. You might get them more slowly. You'll see this with authors. Sometimes it's very... Unless you're approaching the new book in a series feeling fresh and excited, it can be hard to get into it. And so I mode shift quite a lot. And I went from the Stormlight, or from the Wheel of Time books, to writing the first Wax and Wane book, which is kind of the interim series. I can do a Western, early 1900s. That'll fit into this thing. And that became 4 books. So suddenly I had a 13-book series instead of a 9-book series. And then one day, I was talking to a fan, and they're like, you know, if you did one more trilogy, there'd be 16. And if you haven't read the Mistborn book, 16 is like a number of mythological import in the Mistborn world, and I'm like, oh. And then I thought, you know what would be cool in the Mistborn world is a cyberpunk in between far future space opera and, you know, modern day. And so suddenly there were 16 Mistborn books planned. So some of the ideas for the original, what was going to be the 1980s, which I'll read to you later, Some of the ideas for that I used in Wax and Wane, and others I moved to the cyberpunk. There are still some that are this, but it's been really fun this last year to dig into and really look at what would Scadrial be like in an equivalent to the 1980s. And I want to evoke some of that technology, but not have it just like feel like Stranger Things, the fantasy edition, like it's. And so that's been really fun, right? It is another world. Scadrial, I do base a little bit more on Earth than some of my other planets, but it is another world, and we don't want to just, people are walking around in hammer pants. That's 90s, I guess, but yeah. So anyway, that's a long preamble to I finally am being able to write this thing that I pitched to my editor in 2004. Yeah. I really did not think it was going to take me 20 years to get to what then was the second series that I had, the fourth book that I had planned to do. But some things happened in the meantime. And it's one of those things, it's like, where did those 20 years go? But we got another 20 years. Theoretically, I'll finish the Cosmere at that point. That's the goal. And I am going gung-ho on the new Mistborn books. I'm going to finish the first one this year, the next one the year after, and the next one the year after that. We're going to release them in 2028. Why are we waiting so long? Let me answer this question for you. Why are we waiting so long? So, a curious thing happens when an author starts to sell well. This curious thing is your publisher starts to see that maybe if they release a book by you, it really helps their bottom line look good for financials at the end of the year. When I started, I turned in Elantris 2.5 years before its pub date. This is really common. Other authors you'll talk to will say, yeah, 18 months to 24 months is usually the average, sometimes even longer. And I was really good at turning books in early. I would give them 2 years to 2.5 years of editing and all these things. And then the publisher started to realize they had Sanderson books they were sitting on that would help those bottom lines, those year-end financials look really good if there's a Sanderson book on them. And so I would turn them in what I thought was 2 years ahead of time, and then they would come out in 18 months instead of 2 years, and then a year instead of 2 years, and then 6 months until we got to several of the Wax and Wane books where one came out, I believe, in like August, and one came out in January. And all of that extra time I built up got eaten away by the publisher being like, well, we can't sit on a Sanderson book, to the point that we then got in this situation where I would turn in books and they would consistently publish them 6 months later. I want to claw that time back. I want to give more time to my art team and my editorial team and my own revision team. And so I said we would do it for for Stormlight 4, but we're really doing it now. And that is why there's the break. There's 2 to 2.5 years I need to claw back so that books are having more time in the production cycle. And that's why we're doing this. So I'm going to turn in Stormlight Ghostbloods 1 next year. And that is 2026 for a 2028 release. Then I'll turn in the next one and the next one, and I will start writing Stormlight 6 as soon as those are turned in. I think that those will go in, so I'll probably start writing Stormlight 6 in 27 or 28, right? And I will spend 2 years writing that, but then I want to have 2 years in revisions and time. And so that's why I landed on 2031. I think I will hit that date. I know that sounds like a long time, and I apologize for that. I have been consistently faster I've been faster than people expected with these, but not as fast as all the Golden and Silver Age writers. They put us to shame these modern days. You know, Robert Jordan had a Wheel of Time book out every year for like the first 6 years. Yeah. Like those writers during those eras, like sometimes go look up how many books Asimov wrote. And yes, they're shorter than epic fantasy, but it's more than 4 times what writers write, like those writers back then. But This is kind of your explanation. That's your pre-explanation to why 2031. I think that's a very reasonable date. I don't think it'll get shifted at all. The other question I want to pre-answer before I go to Q&A with you all is, what about movies, Brandon? What about television shows? People are usually very interested in this. So what about movies? What about television shows? For those who don't know, I made kind of an interesting play with a friend of mine back in 2018. This is my friend Donald. He was the director and creator of Fortnite. And we figured we'd try to make Mistborn as a film with Fortnite money. Meaning Epic Games, whose owner is a pretty cool guy, likes to be, he's in the tech space, and we pointed out to him, hey, Amazon is making movies and Apple's making movies, maybe Epic should make movies. And we had actually a much better pitch than that. It's more detailed, I can't get into it, but he's like, yeah, sure, let's give it a try. And for various reasons, it didn't work out, but we spent like 5 years working on this. Making this film. We had casting, we had a lot of things done, and it just didn't end up working out. So again, Tim Sweeney's a pretty cool guy. Last year I'm like, hey, it's not going to work out. It's obviously, we're done. Can I have my rights back? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so I got my film rights back. I wrote a check. I just paid back what they'd paid me, and I got my film rights back. So that puts us back to square one. So, yeah, and these squares take a long time to move through. So we went back to square one, and I went out and I did pitches in May after kind of putting everything together and seeing, and, everybody's really excited, but now I have the very difficult job of who do I pick? What, how do we work on it? What are the choices that we make? I still believe in a Mistborn theatrical and a Stormlight premium cable. I could be persuaded to animation if the people making it were persuaded that they could give the budget to animation that it deserves. It's harder to get the money people in Hollywood to write the checks for animation, particularly in a series. To get Arcane made, basically, Riot had to fund a big part of it. And so anything is open. I'm willing to try anything, though I do still believe in a Mistborn theatrical and a Stormlight premium cable. So that's what we're looking at. I have really no news other than everyone's enthusiastic. Once you do a Kickstarter for $40 million, everyone in Hollywood says, ooh! But at the same time, I want to be very careful. We're in an era where science fiction fantasy gets made in film and television quite a bit more, and there are some great success stories, and there's a whole lot of not so great stories, or not so great, adaptations. Halo. Oh my goodness, Halo. So, you know what? I am willing to risk that. You can't get a Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings, without risking a Halo TV show, right? That's just the truth of it. And people who, the people who are making these are generally really excited, creative, interesting people. They're fun to work with. It's just making a movie or a television show is really hard. It's a lot of moving pieces. So that's all I have. We'll see what happens. There's a chance I'll be able to in the State of the Sanderson in December. The decent chance I'll have made a choice by then. Then it'll depend on if we've signed the contracts, whether I can say anything or not. So that's where we are. Those are your two big questions. We're going to go to a Q&A now. Excellent question. And this is an excellent question, but it's a really hard one to answer because as an author, the way I approach character is I'm always looking for something that is like myself to put into the character, to give that, write what you know, express some authenticity. And I'm always looking for something very unlike myself to explore. The way I try to come to understand the world is through exploring people different from myself. My answer on this one is usually Sazed. as a character, but the truth is that there's a bit of me in every character, and there's something different from me in every character. But, he's the one that I just like, something about the way that when I was seeing through his eyes felt really like I was able to add some authenticity to that. I don't know as much what it's like to be Kelsier as what it's like to be, I know now, but I was exploring that during the books. So, great question, thank you. So the main crossover characters you will see were from the original outline. It's called Ghostbloods. If you know anything about what that means, you will know who a major viewpoint character in the series is going to be. And this was the original plot line. But having written the Wax and Wayne books, there are certain cameo things that I can write in, references that are more like references than they are and whatnot to characters that were in Wax and Wayne. And in fact, I deliberately changed it from a 70-year gap to a 50-year gap so that you could potentially see some of the people from the second era who were younger during the second era have something to do with what's going on in era 3. So, excellent question. Yes, now this is something I think about a lot. So what informs my questions? My decisions there. I don't ever want to kill a character for shock value. That's just, I know that works in some stories, but I feel like that's not my writing style. I approach story in, every author does their own unique way. My unique way of approaching story is I am an outliner and I world build a lot beforehand. I don't outline my characters. I find that if I do, my characters lack some volition and some sense of, I don't know, that authenticity, right? Early in my career, before I published, I found that sometimes my characters were wooden. And this is because I had this whole outline for them, and then as I sat down to write that character, I found that I came to understand them, and came to understand their motivations, and came to understand the decisions they would make. And because of that, if I forced them to make decisions that the outline said, then it would feel inauthentic. And so I have this kind of back and forth with my outline. I do a lot of outlining. I say, this is what I think the structure of the plot is. But then as I come to write the characters, I get to know them, and they kind of have veto power, so to speak, over things in the outline. And a lot of times I need to go back to the outline to rebuild the outline to figure out what kind of story, this character, what the decisions they would make. This is a long, rambling way to say, I don't even, it's not some mystical thing. The characters come alive, and I am an outliner. I am pretty, the way that I approach story is very nuts and bolts in some cases, but then there's that sense of whimsy that a character adds. And so why do I kill characters? I let characters make decisions, and I try not to hold back the consequences of those decisions. And it's a really fine line, right? Because in some cases, a character makes a decision, and you're like, well, they make the decision, this happens, this happens, this happens, and you'd be like, let's find a different way to tell this story, because if that decision happens, then the story will not be fun. But in other cases, you have the character make the decision, and you're like, well, this is the consequences of that. I'm going to let them make that decision anyway. And I try to play with that and arrive at that middle ground between what is a satisfying story and making sure that the character volition doesn't go away. And that's, like I said, a rambling answer to how it usually happens for me. Almost every outline that I write has if there's a character dying, you're going to hate this. There is a version of the book where they didn't, where they made a different decision. I know that's annoying to readers, right? I will say almost all the time it is according to outline, like even if they've made decisions, it's things that I've foreseen that they would do. By about like the first 15% being done, I know the character pretty well, and at that point the outline locks in. There's almost never where I get to the end and a character makes a different decision. But this did happen in Stormlight 5. There was a character who was supposed to die in the original outlines, and I decided they would not make the decision that I had made for them, and indeed they made a different decision. And I can tell you that in a spoiler session at some point, and things like that. I'm going to say it leans a little more toward the shards than the people, but both are involved. And there are flare-ups that are actual full-on conflict, but I am writing books in periods that isn't happening because I don't want to deal too much with that yet. Does that make sense? You horrible person, but this would work. Yeah. Yeah, you were absolutely horrible. That would work. Remember that that's going to make a god metal spike, and that's going to have some weird effects being a god metal, but yeah. All right, yeah, that could work. Yeah, excellent question. So this is probably a little bit writerly, right? You'll see this in a lot of writers' writing. We are very interested in this idea of layers of identity because as we are writing, we are adopting a different identity. In short and in brief, but one of my favorite stories about Robert Jordan was that Harriet, because I never met Robert Jordan, but Harriet, his wife, was his editor and was my editor on the 3 Wheel of Time books I wrote. And she would tell this story sometimes to fans at signings we would do together, where she would say, oh, he would come in some nights and he would slink around the corner and he would look all furtive. And she's like, you've been writing Patton Fane, right? Who is this kind of, and he'd be like, how could you tell? And she said she could tell whatever viewpoint he had been writing if she saw him within a few minutes of him finishing. It doesn't go that far for me, but I do very much like, if you've read kind of essays I've written and things, one of the reasons I write is to experience the world through the eyes of different people and to feel like they feel, which is different from the way that I experience the world. The way that emotion happens for me is different from a lot of people. And because of that, I always feel a little bit like I'm layering on, I'm doing what Wayne does. I'm putting on a hat, and I'm being a version of that person while I'm trying to authentically write them as best as I can. And I think you see that manifesting in my writing because it's such an idea that fascinates me so. So the question was, how do I balance time for research with time for writing? I do research in 2 phases. So when I am writing a book, getting ready to write a book, I will do enough research about something that I want to write about to get myself not to an expert, but to like a decent layman. And this usually only takes a couple days per topic. It involves, going on the internet and saying, all right, what do people get wrong about X? And finding someone's blog post where they just rant about how people get the real life version of investigation detective work wrong, or what it's like to live with this disability wrong, how it's presented in media, and you're like, all right, getting this list of don't do these are the big ones, and then reading some voices of people who will write about their experience. We live in a wonderful time that you can go and read about basically anyone's life experience through websites and blogs. And then I generally write the book knowing I'm going to get some things wrong, but hoping that none of the things I get wrong are fundamental. From there, the bigger part of the research happens when I give it to my beta and alpha readers, and I will generally, if it's topic that I need specialists on, I'll hire specialists and we'll get these deep reads, and then they will come back to me and say, these are the big things you got wrong, here is why, and that lets me dig way more deeply into where I'm deficient, so that I can then do another revision to fix those things. Why do I do it this way? Well, a couple of reasons. Main reason being, there's a decent chance that any given character I'm writing will get cut before the book gets to that 15-20% mark. You can see this happen. I released Warbreaker for free, chapter by chapter as I was writing it. Chapter 7 or something, character just vanishes, right? I'm like, I do not need this character in the plot. It's actually causing some problems to have this character in the plot. Gone. right? And so if I do all that research ahead of time, it'll be harder for me to do that, to cut characters that my instincts know need to go. The other reason being, I want to keep momentum on a story, and I want to have the shape of the story before I know where I need to put these fixes in. And I don't have the time to become a 10 out of 10, 10,000 hours expert, and all the things that I need to write about. So I need to rely on the people who are the experts and all of those things. And so once I know what I need, then I can find them. And so that's my process. It's an excellent question. There is a balance there for me. So if it is a topic that's going to be very deep to the story, I will grab some books and read them beforehand. But like I said, it only takes a couple of days. Generally, I'm pretty good at knowing where I need a sensitivity reader up front. But this is why I do multiple reads. Alpha reads will illuminate any of those that I need that I didn't know. So for those who don't know, what the difference for me between alpha reads and beta reads is, I will generally do alpha reads are industry professionals, or in some cases, experts in some way. Like my arcanists are alpha readers. These are people that I give every book to say, all right, where am I breaking my own magic system and the lore of the Cosmere in ways that are too detailed to understand even for my continuity editors, right? And this is going to my whole team, particularly Peter, Karen, and the editorial team are really good with picking out, we should get a sensitivity reader here. 9 times out of 10, I know, but once in a while they pick one out for me. The nice thing is I work in a system where I have access to the ability to pay sensitivity readers, right? And generally, I can let Peter and his team, who's my editorial VP, kind of move through fandom and find people if there aren't experts that you can just hire. But a lot in New York, everyone the editors all know who the people are that you can hire, and you can just go hire them, right? And then we have them either do a read on their own, or if they would like to, participate in the beta read, which is where I bring in readers who are not industry professionals, who are a test audience. And I'll sometimes do multiple beta reads. And they can participate with the beta readers if they want, or they can just read and give to me. And then because we're paying them, it's much easier for me to not feel like I'm imposing by asking questions, by asking them to reread what I've written and things like that. And that helps a lot. Outside the community, sometimes there are people like, they don't understand how good the professional beta readers are at helping you tell the story you want to tell. It's not like there's some gatekeeper saying, no, these beta readers are really good. And they're like, all right, well, here's a bunch of different ways this has been presented. We had this with deafness in Trust of the Emerald Sea. Said, here's a bunch of different ways. Here's the real life, how things work. Here are different recommendations we have, but nothing is really that strict. It's all just about, here, I'm a resource to help you. And man, that beta reader, she was fantastic. And every beta reader I've had that's been a reader like that has been really good. And the fun thing is, as you explore this, as you work with this, your story gets better in multiple ways. If you want to, I won't go into depth in this, but if you want to understand why, go listen to the podcast 99% Invisible. It has a really good episode on curb cuts, and kind of just like how looking to be more accommodating will help the entire world and things like that. So anyway, and I can tell you that on Tress, the book got better in all sorts of ways because of this one reader pushing me in ways to make the story stronger. It became better characters, not just more sensitive. So there you are. Ooh, yeah, this is a hard one. Not that it's hard to answer, but it's long. So I will not go all the way into depth. I will say, go watch my writing lectures. I talk about this for 2 separate lectures for almost 3 hours talking about this idea. But the main concept I use is a philosophy called promise, progress, payoff. And kind of focusing on those 3 ideas. The idea being that every story is making promises. And they're not just promises of plot, they're promises of tone, they're promises of character, they're promises of what the book is going to include. If you pick up the opening of a Terry Pratchett book, it's going to be promising certain things that are different from a Brandon Sanderson book is going to be promising. And so the idea being the book is making all these different promises. Learning how to make progress on those promises is what really makes a book into a page turner. Learning how to give proper signposts and misdirections so that you are eventually giving a payoff. And you have to decide what kind of payoff you want. I use often the metaphor of sometimes imagine giving a gift to a younger person who's like, I want a toy car. And you're like, all right, I'm going to buy you I'll buy them a toy car. They think they're getting a toy car. Sometimes you just want to deliver them the best toy car ever, right? This is like Jane Austen. You know what you want to read and get in a Jane Austen book. You're surprised more by how well it works, not by any given twist. Sometimes you say, you want a toy car, great, and then you buy yourself a toy plane. And you play with it for months to the point that the kid's like, man, I wish I'd asked for a plane. And then you give them a plane. That's dangerous because, but that's kind of your classic twist. This is the while you were sleeping method of twists. If you've watched that movie, you think you want a car, but you actually want a plane. The plane is way better, right? And then sometimes the kid wants a car and they get a brand new Ferrari, right? And so you way over-deliver. These are just different methodologies. And sometimes you just don't give them what they wanted, but you somehow make it satisfying. I can't talk about that here because I have only 1 minute till the reading.